I feel in me a deeper safety and a deeper trust in being able to lean into a container like that as a way of expanding, exploring, and experiencing more of the gifts that life has to offer.
Welcome to the Alive and Aligned podcast, a show dedicated to helping you live a life of truth and share your fullest gifts with the world. I'm your host, Pete Byrne, and I'm here to open your mind to new perspectives, to introduce you to some epic humans who are already out there living their deepest truth. So now just grounding in, taking a breath, letting go of anything you're still holding onto from today, and just opening up to receiving this episode now. Let's dive on in.
Welcome to this solo episode of the Alive and Aligned podcast on the topic of relating. So the reason I'm making this episode is to kind of challenge myself a bit. It's a bit of an edge, I'm not going to lie, because I recognize it's very easy for me to sit on a perch and talk about things that I have a lot of experience with and maybe even some degree of authority in. However, the topic of romantic relating is definitely something that I have not mastered by any means, and that is still an unfolding process in my life. And yet there's been so many of the teachings and the goals that have come from other areas of my life that I've been transferring into this field in the past few months and years. And my desire is to share a few of the core insights I've had. These are insights and perspective shifts, ways of looking at the topic of romantic relating in a whole new way that totally shifted my view and my perspective on what it means to be in a relationship. Outside anything that I'd ever been taught by my parents, my society, by the media, and by Hollywood love movies and rom-coms. Shout out to Ryan Gosling and co. This is basically about getting down and dirty into a topic that most people can relate to in some way, which is romantic relationships. We all know connection is a basic human need. We all need it. We all crave it. And yet our modern day dating industry has become so twisted and warped in the sense of, this swipe happy dating app culture. And we see that also in, the amount of divorce increasing across the world. It's, some could say that that's a byproduct of, marriages that maybe weren't destined to be or were formed in times that, maybe if they were one generation previously, might have stuck it out to save face in the community, and now it's more acceptable to divorce, so they're doing it. But the intention with this is to really explore, why is it such a pain point, and why is it so damn hard, and why do there seem to be so few people actually nailing this? As it's something that we've been doing for, the entire existence of the human population. Like, we've been relating to each other in one way or another. So why is it so bloody hard these days? My experience of relating is that, I recognize now, sitting in this, present day moment chair, that there was a lot of stories I had, a lot of beliefs that I had about what is love. Baby, don't hurt me. And what does it mean to be in a relationship? And I can say safely that I wasn't always aware of these stories and these behaviors, but there's evidence of them in my past. When we look back through our history, we can always join the dots. So one of the things I love doing with clients is like an audit of past relationships and going back through and, dissecting the different people that they've been attracted to and why, and really understanding why. What were the core needs that were being met underneath that attraction and that relationship? What was it they needed to learn? What was the goal, and what were the lessons that they learned from that relationship? And what can they, when they become consciously aware of it, how can they choose a new path and avoid repeating that? And that really is where growth happens for me. It's seeing an opportunity to fall back into an old version of ourselves and start that old loop again and turning right instead of left. And that is my intention with this podcast, to bring light to some of these stories and these limiting beliefs and these outdated paradigms of what it means to be in a romantic relationship. So, a little bit about me and my story when it comes to this topic. The edge begins. So, I was what you might call a late bloomer when it came to romantic relationships. I was not so hot out of the gates. I was a bit of an angsty teenager and kind of, just never was not confident, put it that way, in my teens. So it was really into my 20s when I started to really find my ground and step more into romantic relationships and having my first long-term relationships. And exploring that, I then became a traveling musician, traveling around the world. And so I had the opportunity to meet many different kinds of women and from all different cultures and backgrounds, and really getting to sample what's available, and really in an environment that was really supportive to that, because it was like I would be traveling around and I'd get to meet people, and there would be the safety of a short-term container, knowing that, maybe we spend a week in each other's company and then it's going to come to an end, and that's totally okay, and both parties accept that, and there's a safety in that to go deep to a degree without like it being the deep, like, if you get what I mean. It's like it allowed for me, again, looking back through the stories and looking back through the history, it allowed an avoidance of true vulnerability, if I'm honest. It's like I can play this character, I can play this amazing white knight style character who's really open and has it all together, but there's no actual dropping down the levels into true authentic vulnerability. And so my lifestyle supported that, and I was able to really get a lot of actually fulfillment at that time out of that persona, because it was safe. It meant none of my shit had to come up, which was great, and it supported my lifestyle, playing music, happy days. So life is great in 20s, but I started to recognize that the longer term connections I had were more based around unconsciously trying to prove myself. Okay, so maybe you can relate to this idea of, and again, this is something that I have only dissected after months and even years at the time of diving into and seeking to understand why it is that I was driven to follow these patterns of behavior. So what I noticed was that there was a deep feeling of a lack of self-worth within me, self-doubt, and unworthiness for me is the core driver of most, if not nearly all, of our struggles as humans. For me, the long-term seeking for this feeling of worthiness that we just can't reach, and if we just try something else and a new pattern of behavior, maybe we'll reach it. But for me, my way of proving myself to the world or to whatever characters in my life that I was trying to prove myself to was by showing up for women as the savior, as the guy who could come in and hold space and hold all the emotions and, be this guy that show up like no other man ever could for these women, or no other man had. So that was kind of my way of validating myself, was to be in connection with people in a way that allowed me to be the white knight, be the savior. Therefore, I found myself drawn to women who maybe allowed for that to come through. So opportunities for, lots of emotions and lots of things to come alive. I loved taking the blame. I loved taking on responsibility, because it was just another way that I could show up even better and prove myself even more. So that the polar opposite of that, if we think in terms of polarity, someone who wants to take all the blame and take all the responsibility will naturally attract someone who's the polar opposite of that, which is someone who doesn't like to take blame or responsibility and likes to externalize things. So because in that situation, my worthiness was being provided, and my deepest feeling of, wow, I'm enough, is coming from my ability to show up and hold space and the value I can provide, okay? What I realized that my relationships, my romantic relationships, and my concept of love was not actually love. It was not a healthy relationship. It was actually more of, you could say, codependency. You could say like a contract where it's like, I'm drawn to you because you allow me to experience a part of myself that allows me to feel worthy. Which is pretty crazy if you think about it, you know? As a model, and as, you know, romantic relationships being one of the cornerstones of our modern day life. And I'm thinking about, right, if I'm doing this, where did I learn it from? Probably learned it from my relationship with the parents. Let's be honest. We're all working unconsciously here. Who probably got it from their parents. And if, I'm probably not the only one doing this. There's probably other people that are also playing out these patterns who learned it from their parents. And how many people and their idea of love and relationship is not actually that. Not actually this fully accepting and having deep love and gratitude for another human, and is actually unconsciously in some kind of polarized dynamic where they're using this person as a way to feel worthy by playing out some kind of behavioral dance with them. Like, it's pretty dark. But what I started to realize was that in doing these things for others and in showing up in these ways, it was causing a lot of negative effects in my life. And the creation of what we'll say covert contracts. Okay, so a covert contract is when I make an agreement in my head with you when I say, hey, my partner, I'm gonna, make myself feel worthy by doing lots of things for you and expect you to appreciate me for them in return, even though you didn't ask me to do them. And if at any point in the future you say something negative or you maybe want to pull away or break up, then I will use this as a way of playing the victim and being resentful and saying, how could you do this to me? And even though the whole agreement was based on what we call a covert contract, where I've made an agreement in my head that if I try really hard to do things for you, then you will validate me and you will never leave me, and therefore I'll be safe and I can continue to feel worthy, which is, again, pretty fucked up. So there's a lot there, but the point is, when we explore these different parts of the story, we can start to pull out the key patterns and the key core beliefs that were driving, in this case, my behavior. And maybe you can relate to a few of these in your romantic history. So from that journey, I've arrived today, I believe, at a point of feeling more centered in myself, worthy, and able to communicate effectively, able to own my stuff and recognize that someone else should be owning theirs or can own theirs, and entrusting them to do that instead of trying to take on everyone's stuff and use it as a way to feel worthy. So there were 3 main paradigm shifts that I've uncovered in the last months that I would love to share. And these, for me, have totally shifted and changed the way I think about relationships and the desire I have to be in a relationship. Whereas before I could have been like, give or take, maybe I'm happier being this kind of traveling vagabond. Whereas now I really, 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 really see the value, and I really see a way that it's sustainable as well, long-term and conscious, and not just people playing out codependent patterns, like actually a way of co-relating with somebody in a romantic context that's healthy and is honoring both the needs of both parties. So that's kind of breakthrough. And that, I believe, is opening doors for me in terms of my energy, in terms of how I am in the world, and in terms of what I want to create and call into my life in terms of a romantic partner. So the first block that I believe people have, or that I had anyway, I'm going to speak from I and then we can extrapolate outwards. So the first block that I had for sure was this idea of binary relating, okay? Conditional connection. Okay, big statement, which the internal dialogue of that sounds a bit like I'm all in or I'm all out. 1 or 0. Over here, you love me and therefore you never, ever, ever want to be with anyone else ever or even think about them. And if you do that, you're going to come all the way over here to 0, which means you're bad. Or I am unworthy and I am unlovable. So can you hear the polarity, the binary nature of that? It's all in or all out. That could also sound like you are in a relationship with me and you must automatically know the ways I want to be treated and how I want to be met. And if you don't do those things that you've just, read my mind on, then I will say nothing, okay? I'm going to let it build over time. I'm later going to use minor things, right, to really vent and release my frustration for your inability to read my mind and pamper to my every need. Also sounds a bit ridiculous, as you can probably agree. Back to this binary thinking. If you love me, you will not do X, Y, Z. If you connect, even on a energetic level, talking to someone else, you must not love me. These are the terms that most relationships are set up under, because that's what we've been unconsciously conditioned into acting through. It's what we are almost like brought up in, and it's this love-hate, in, out, on, off dynamic. And it's not really serving anyone. What I recognize for me is that there's certain conditions within that. Like, let's say I had a partner who wanted to explore romantically with someone else. It would be easier for me, through that binary thinking, okay, to cut them off and label them bad and, dirty or whatever I want to call them, than sitting with the potential for unworthiness or pain or grief or sadness and other attachment emotions that might arise within me as a result of my partner connecting with someone else. And I recognize that. Now, that might be a conscious choice that I make. I might say, I want to be in a monogamous relationship with this person, and therefore, if they want to go and connect with other people outside of the relationship, that's not going to work for me. But I'm not going to do it on the basis of, if you love me, then you won't do it. I'm going to do it on the basis of, I'm not going to allow this because I know it's going to bring up all my shit and I'm not ready to sit with my shit. Let's be real about why we're doing it, okay? That is the real reason, ultimately. Because to say that I can love someone only if they 100% all in, only have eyes for me, and that I can't love someone who also has other desires, is something that's been really eye-opening and challenging for me, let's be honest. But it's a paradigm shift that, at least for me, it's feeling into this idea of like, wow, am I really connecting with this person conditionally? Or can I unconditionally love this person? Can I accept truly all of them to the point where I'm willing to at least own and be real with the fact that I don't want them to get or connect with anyone else, because that's going to bring up all of my unworthiness wounds. So that's the first debunked paradigm piece around monogamous relating and love as a binary conditional connection, 1 and 0, as a means of avoiding deep unworthiness. The second paradigm shifting concept is the concept of forever. This was a big one for me, because what I was thinking, what like my brain was thinking when I thought about relating was, if I begin to date this person and I start to, open up a little and give them some compliments or, feed them some of the good stuff, then that means that I will be locked in forever into that relationship. The reason I'm locked in forever is because I can never break up with them, because if I break up with somebody, then I am bad. Because I will hurt them. If I hurt someone, then I'm a bad person. Or I will be judged as flaky, as, not showing up as a fully masculine man, or all these other stories that I can have. And what I noticed is that in my history, in my past, by avoiding commitment, I was avoiding the pain and shame of the potential for future fallout, of potentially something not being aligned and having to break it off with that person and feeling guilt and shame for that. So this forever concept is a really interesting one to debunk, because it's like, If I can trust that someone else can deal with pain, and I can trust that even if people judge me, X, Y, Z, that I will be okay, then that opens me once again to this concept of let's see how it goes, instead of just because I date you, it means it's forever. And the third and final paradigm shifting concept is the idea of safety in a relationship. So I would imagine most people in the world believe that safety in relationships comes from having a ring on the finger, or having had, a legal document, contract signed, maybe having a verbal promise, or maybe you're Facebook official in a relationship. Therefore, it's locked in and it's safe. And the safety is in the verbal commitment. However, for me, what I've now recognized and realized is that safety in relationship doesn't mean shit if both parties cannot hold themselves to a degree in their own triggers, okay? So the ability and the capacity to regulate one's own emotions and be with oneself is what creates safety. Because if I'm in a relationship with someone who does not have the ability to regulate themselves and falls into pattern and into trigger every time something comes up, then there's no stable foundations for mature adult conversations. There's no ability for both parties to come back to center and say, all right, we see what's happening. That's yours, that's mine. Let's work through it and build and grow. The challenges cannot be navigated in a mature way, and things descend into basically what we might call stage one patterns, where it's just the man and the woman unconsciously at each other's throats, okay? Which we might see from previous generations if you've got grandparents, great-grandparents who maybe might have operated in ways that weren't entirely conscious in the relating patterns. Or maybe even your parents, maybe even your current relationship. So this idea of safety not being the ring on the finger, the wedding band, but safety being that core foundation of the relationship based on the capacity to regulate through trigger, so that when stuff comes up, I know that I'm safe in this relationship because we both have the ability to hold ourselves and to navigate it together. I'm not responsible for your stuff. You're not responsible for mine. If a trigger comes up for you, I don't need to go into space holding mode. I can leave you and trust that you got you. And I can go do me, and we can come back together and continue to relate as grown, mature adults. That was a pretty big one for me, to have that one land. So those three, conditional connection, the forever concept, and this new idea of safety, have been three really potent paradigm shifting pieces that have dropped in. There's a lot of P's in one row there. And that started to allow me to think of relationships. Like, what could that look like? What could actually, moving away from that old paradigm of like using a relationship as a way to show up as the white knight and the savior and have my, need for validation and worthiness met through playing out a role that's not actually a healthy relationship or love for that matter. What could that new reality look like? And this was a really interesting exploration of the mind to see like, what could that feel like? What feels really aligned in terms of a North Star to aim towards in relating for me in my life? And this is what came out. So as of now, as of this moment, if I was to meet a partner that I believe I could have potential of a future with, I would commit to being all in on that person. And I would allow that relationship and that connection to deepen and to grow until the point that I realized that it was no longer serving me, that the negatives were outweighing the positives, that boundaries were crossed, or that I'm convinced that an alternate reality, be it an alternate connection or being solo, was actually going to best serve me. What I recognize is that the gold is in the deepening and the safety to step into that deepening. The belief that would need to be in place in order for me to step into the arena with that person would be the belief that they have the capacity to show up, to hold themselves, to meet their own needs and help me meet mine as I help them to meet theirs, beyond what we can individually do of our own accord, solo, hanging out by ourselves. I would desire for that person to be a home for presence, for connection, for safety, for intimacy, and of course, for love. My trust in that person would develop over time, coming from the ways that I've observed them, navigate triggers, how they deal with the shadows that emerge, inevitably that come up, because we're all human and we've all got stuff. In the stories they tell and their willingness to question them and change them when presented with new information. This is huge. What is their ability to tune into the needs of others, to be humble, to have compassion and true empathy, for there to be an equal 50-50 exchange, where it's not one of us hogging the microphone all the time, but there's an equal 50-50 back and forth flow. And most importantly, what I would seek in that person would be the ability to recognize and to communicate their own internal landscape and their own needs and desires and boundaries. If a person can do those things, they line up in that way, then as of this moment in time, I feel in me a deeper safety and a deeper trust in being able to lean into a container like that as a way of expanding, exploring, and experiencing more of the gifts that life has to offer. I recognize that in exploring purpose and in exploring the different arenas of life, making a lot of money or having great friends or, getting a six-pack or achieving something in sport or music or wherever it might be, that the arena of romantic relating is always going to be one of the cornerstone pillars of my life, of most people on Earth's life. And therefore, for me, it is my commitment to endeavor to continue to deepen into connection, to have the hard conversations, to face the shadowed parts of me with the promise of experiencing the full spectrum of the human experience. I said experience twice. Experiencing the full spectrum of life through this human body, and really getting to live a full and complete life. And I think that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope that in me exploring these different paradigm shifting concepts and the stories, that you've been able to see parts of yourself, you've been able to maybe have some little shifts, and maybe you go out into the world or out into your infinite container of relationship with a whole new lens and a whole new confidence and safety to go for it and experience a deeper love than you've ever known before. Thank you for listening.